Let's go.
Let's go. Oh, no.
Do you want to?
Sorry. I'll let you.
Next one.
I'm excited and I feel relaxed and I'm ready to party. Don't say sorry. You don't need to do that. You don't need to apologize. It's a fucked up female habit. You don't need to be sorry for anything ever.
Can you guess what every woman's worst nightmare is?
I don't have rage issues!
I have nothing to prove to you.
When I'm good, I'm very good. But when I'm bad, I'm better.
I say when it comes to stardom and Lauren, there are no accidents.
Hi, Karen Peterson.
Hello, and welcome to Citizen Dame, the podcast where allergies are crazy and we're just some of us are all sorts of messed up. I'm Karen Peterson, joined by Lauren Humphries-Brooks.
I don't know that was a reference to my Yellow Jacket stream last night or not. It's just like some of us are all kinds of messed up in different ways.
Probably I could have said all of us because both of us are in very different ways, but I applaud your Yellow Jacket stream episode that we were talking about.
Yeah, it was a result of you tweeting about like how you were upset that there was no new Yellow Jackets this week.
They really could have done a better job of like making sure the whole world knew there would be no episode this week.
I don't understand why there's not an episode this week. I just like, but for what reason? You're just skipping it, okay? But yeah,
it's not like the Yellow Jackets crowd is really that invested in the NFL draft.
Is that why they delayed it?
I don't know. That's the only conflict I can see.
I don't know. I honestly don't understand some television scheduling. Like there's sometimes shows will take a hiatus. I'm like, why are you just not on for 2 weeks? I don't get it. But yes, as a result, I had a Yellow Jackets dream last night in which one of them got kidnapped as they were like adults. And one of them got kidnapped and then the others were like, you messed with the wrong bitches. And they wind up like lighting the dude on fire and burning down an apartment building. And Bob Hoskins is there for some reason. And then I woke up and that was what happened. And I was just like, why is Bob Hoskins there? Bob Hoskins couldn't be in Yellow Jackets because Bob Hoskins died a while ago.
He's very dead. But I would love it if Bob Hoskins was in Yellow Jackets.
And he was like married to one of them. I don't remember which one. I kind of feel like maybe he was married to Misty, which would sort of make sense in some weird, interesting way. But yeah, I was just like, Bob Hoskins. And he was very much like, hey, Bob Hoskins is in this episode.
I like it. Let's make that happen. Karen Kasama, I'm sure you can practice necromancy. And bring him back. Bring back Bob Hoskins.
To be in a Yellow Jackets episode. Yeah.
Specifically for that purpose. Oh, goodness. So how's everything else going? How was your week?
Good. It's been a long week for some reason. How about yours?
Also long. Yeah. I'm not feeling great and I don't know. It's a combination of things, I think, but it's just been busy. It's so crazy busy when you work at a school and the school year is about to wind down and you're about to have, all the end of year festivities and graduation and stuff. It's just a lot. So, and then comes summer and it's really slow and it's awesome. So I just got to get through the next 4 weeks and then I get a little bit of a break. Yeah. Chaos until then. If they cancel any more or skip any more weeks on Yellow Jackets, I'm not going to be happy. Oh, goodness. So, we thought it'd be fun this week to talk about Warner Brothers, which is celebrating its 100th anniversary this year. And it's 100 years since the company was officially incorporated. They incorporated in 1923.
Since it was founded. Yeah.
Yeah. But so, back as I just learned this week, as recently as the 1960s, they were still claiming they were founded in 1905 because that is when the four brothers were they first started kind of building toward the company that would bear their name. The brothers are Harry, Albert, Sam, and Jack. Those were most of them not their birth names, because they were a family of immigrants from Poland. They were Polish Jewish, and when they came to the United States, they anglicized their names, as was the practice. So I'm not going to try to pronounce some of their original names because I don't want to butcher them. But anyway, so the brothers, started off, they bought a projector, they started doing exhibitions throughout the back east, like Pennsylvania, Ohio area, and eventually founded Warner Brothers in 1923. And at the time, they were one of the big five. They've always been one of the big five studios, but at the time they were kind of the lesser studio. Some of the things, even with their big movie star, their biggest movie star was a dog named Rin Tin Tin. And even with that, their movies were just not as big of hits as what you're getting from RKO and 20th Century and Paramount and MGM. So they set out to change that, and they started just really ramping up their star power. And so by the 30s, they were making these gangster movies that really took off and just really made Warner Brothers kind of the big studio that we know today. And of course, they still make gangster movies, but they've done all kinds of things since then. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about 3 films that kind of encapsulate different eras and different genres of Warner Brothers history. And I don't think we could have picked 3 films that were more different from each other and have less in common other than the studio that made them.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like looking over, it's just like, this is a weird combination of films,
really
and some of it is because we deliberately chose different genres. So I think there is some affinity between the first film that we're going to talk about and the last one. There's a little bit of like relationship there, but yeah, they're very, very different films.
Like extremely different, and that's cool. So the first one we wanted to talk about is this is a pre-code gangster movie, and that is The Public Enemy. Now, Warner Brothers made a lot of gangster movies, especially in the 1930s and 40s. They had a whole list. I had it in front of me and now I can't find it. Things like The Public Enemy, I already mentioned. Angels with Dirty Faces. Help me out, what are some other ones?
Little Caesar was one of the
Little
big
Caesar,
kind of launching pad in terms of the gangster movies, right? So with Edward G. Robinson, you've also got The Public Enemy.
I'm a fugitive from a chain gang.
Yeah, I'm a fugitive from a chain gang. And then slightly later, when you get kind of postcode, you get into films like Dead End and Angels with Dirty Faces and stuff like that. I also listed Scarface, even though Scarface I don't think is a Warner Brothers film. I believe it's a United Artists film, but it had like strong affinities with what Warner Brothers was doing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about The Public Enemy specifically. This film was directed by William Wellman, who
he directed Wings.
Yes, I was trying to talk about, like, he had gone to World War I, and so when he he was I think a pilot in World War I, and so when he came back and was getting involved in film, they tapped him to direct Wings, and that was the first Best Picture winner. So from there, he had a pretty notable career, and one of the films that he directed was The Public Enemy, which stars James Cagney, Jean Harlow, Edward Woods, and Joan Blondell, and was produced by Daryl Zanuck, who is a major producer for Warner Brothers, and did a lot of good and a lot of really bad things during his tenure there. So why don't you talk a little bit about the Public Enemy, Lauren?
Well, one of the just going back a little bit, one of the things that I think we have to emphasize that Warner Brothers was really important in terms of the kind of development of the studio era. First of all, Warner Brothers were known for being really unkind to their stars. Like Jimmy Cagney had many things to say about how terrible Warner Brothers was. So did Humphrey Bogart. So did a lot of the stars that were under them. But they had this kind of reputation. They would just sort of produce films. They just kept on, like making these films, some of them not necessarily low budget, but very like cranking them out very much.
Was it Jack that had the quote something like, "I don't want it good, I want it Tuesday"?
Yeah. So Warner Brothers became sort of known for this, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things that they were really focused on, and one of the places that they had a great deal of success, was in gangster films, but what were broadly known as social problem films. And so the whole idea, particularly in the pre-code and then just post-code era, was depicting sort of the underclasses of the United States. So the gangsters, the immigrants, the people who very often didn't get shown in film in the same way, right? And talking about like the issues that were actually accompanying this. So poverty, violence, prostitution, things like that. And I think one of the interesting things about The Public Enemy, in addition to films like Little Caesar and I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang and things like that, but particularly with Public Enemy, it opens, right, with this kind of disclaimer saying like, this is about a problem in our society and we do not support this kind of thing. This is about, a young man who could be found in any city. And that's kind of the tone. And then at the end of the film, they reinforce that. They're just like, we do not support this in any way. The middle of the film, and granted, spoiler alert, the gangster played by James Cagney, Tom, he comes to a very bad end. And I think that we should definitely talk about how the film ends. But for the most part, the film paints a very attractive picture of the gangster.
Yeah, it doesn't look so bad.
Yeah, Cagney, I think that some of it, Cagney is very cool. He's very like, he's this badass. The way that he walks, the way that he moves, like everything, the fast pace of his dialogue, all of it. It shows the gangster as being very cool, coming to a bad end, but having a lot of fun before that. And that's definitely what the film depicts. So it's that interesting kind of tension between showing something without necessarily endorsing it. And definitely a lot of the Warner Brothers films from this period show those issues like social problems, but particularly when it comes to the gangster, as sort of like, oh, this is terrible, he's terrible, like, but look how much fun he has. And I think that that's definitely prevalent here. You definitely see it in Little Caesar. If you look at something more like I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which is one of the bleakest films from this period about criminality and about poverty, and basically it's about a man who isn't a criminal and winds up more or less being railroaded and becomes a criminal as a result of the justice system. The Public Enemy doesn't really do that. This is a guy who has a number of choices throughout his life to not be a gangster, to not become a criminal, and the choices that he makes is to become a small-time crook, a bootlegger, a murderer, like all kinds of things, and eventually to die very horribly.
Yeah. I'm trying to decide where I want to go with this. So there's just a lot of things about Tom in particular that we just learned, like you're saying, and we see them from a young age. He's making bad decisions from the time he's a kid. Like, he steals some skates to give to is Matt's sister. But then he like trips her with them and stuff. Like he just is kind of just rotten from the beginning. But yet there's just this like inherent likability about him. So even when he's just doing bad stuff, you're just like, oh, but that's just Tom. And this is where that whole boys will be boys, kind of thing comes from. But or that it just kind of really draws on that. But there is more to it than that. It's not that simple. And it's clear that Tom is just trouble but you just there's still something that just kind of makes you just want to like with his mom, who just really wants to believe that he's turned his life around, that he's like stopped making all these bad choices, that he's doing good things now. And there's kind of that sense of that. Like we want good things for Tom. And but he just keeps making the wrong choices all along the way.
Well, and one of the things I think the film does really well is that it shows the alternatives and how the alternatives themselves aren't terribly attractive. So it, particularly his older brother, Mike, who is the straight-laced one, he's the good kid, right? And there's very much, it's stereotyping. It's very much tropes, the good boy and the bad boy, right? And of course, the bad boy always has more fun. But one of the things that it shows in kind of as an ancillary almost to Tom's narrative is Mike, working hard, and then he goes off to war and he comes back and it's obvious that he's traumatized. And he's like lecturing his younger brother about how you've got to stand up, you've got to be a good man, all of this stuff. And there's a really good scene actually where Tom basically says, like, don't give me hell for being a murderer. You've killed people. You've killed a lot of people. You got medals for killing people. And while the film doesn't, it doesn't say like, oh, this is exactly the same, it does sort of show how trapped both of them are in a certain sense. They're trapped into a situation both because of their class, because of their families, where Tom is successful. Like he's the one that makes money. He's the one that, is able to give his mother things, whereas Mike is the good boy who doesn't really get anything and still winds up in bad situations and everything. And particularly the ending, there's this impression that something else is going to happen to Mike afterwards. And it is this fatalism almost. Almost none of it is your fault. You kind of have these two paths you can take, and neither one of them are great.
Right. Yeah. And then so how do you make that choice? And I think in Mike's case, who knows what he would do, but after the camera stopped, but it's like, I think what a lot of times what people do depends on their integrity and what their personal integrity is, and what they, not necessarily that they think, oh, well, this is right, but if their own personal morality will, allow for certain things. And so I think in this case, Tom is just a lot more not world weary, but just he just is a lot looser with like his sense of right and wrong. It's like, what does it matter if no one's getting hurt, or if only bad people are getting hurt? Like, who cares, whereas Mike is just like, no, wrong is wrong. But I think when Tom calls him out and says that line about, you didn't get those medals for shaking hands with Germans, I think that kind of unlocks something for him. I think that, and this is something that I always used to, before I really started diving into classic movies and older films, and really starting to kind of not just watch them, but really start to analyze and pull them apart and really look at them closely. I just kind of looked at the entire genre of war and any movies that had like, soldiers and these hero soldiers and stuff, as not being particularly critical of military and war. And what I have learned over the past few years, and what I see in movies like this now, it's like, oh no, they don't just like roll out the red carpet and assume that, this is all heroic. There are definitely degrees of criticism there. And I think that's something that you see here with Tom. And it's like, it's not done in like, when he makes that when they have that argument, it's not like, oh, he's crossed a line by daring to question a soldier. It's like, no, he's making a valid point.
Yeah, and I think that that's highlighted as well in that scene, because you see kind of the physical ravages of the war on Mike. Like they've like darkened his eyes, all of this stuff. He is traumatized, right? Yeah. and he's experienced things that are probably similar to some of the things that Tom has experienced, only, you know, he does have this kind of moral compunction, I guess, against murder.
Yeah.
But one of the I agree with you. One of the interesting things, particularly about pre-code films and films of this period, is you think about it, this film's made in 1931. This is like, you know, a bit more than a decade after the end of World War One. Right.
Yeah. In the movie, Mike comes back in 1920, so it's only been 11 years.
You've got a director who was in World War One. So there is this element to a lot of films of this period that is very critical of war, that you don't see in the same way, you know, in the lead up, especially the lead up to World War II, and then especially the aftermath of World War II, for a lot of different reasons, change in generations and things like that. But there's a lot of criticism of war in itself, and a lot of acknowledgement, even kind of as a secondary element of the story, of the trauma and of the people who went to war. You know, this is depicting the underclasses. This is depicting poor people, right? These are people who live kind of right on the edge of society to begin with. And that's why you've got this interesting kind of conflict where you've got the good boy who does all of the good boy things and does all of the right things and still has all of these issues, and the bad boy who in some ways makes something of himself and is able to earn money and is able to do more, but is doing it from a criminal perspective. I'm always interested in these kinds of films that you realize how close some of these like historical events actually are, and how films are actually depicting and dealing with things like the aftermath of World War One, Prohibition, right? So Prohibition becomes a major element in this film. And 1931, it's still in the middle of Prohibition.
Yeah. I remember a couple of years ago, someone was complaining about the fact that there was a movie about the Gulf War, but it was like, I can't remember which movie it was and what specifically the complaint was. But they were basically like, it's too soon for these types of movies. And it's like, no, let's look at the beginning of film history, you know? And this is a perfect example. I mean, the movie starts with Tom and Matt are kids. Mike is the brother, Matt is the friend. They're kids, and it opens in 1909, which is only 22 years previous from when the movie is coming out. So that's like making movies about stuff that happened in 2001. What happened in 2001?
Well, yeah, and you think about it, a lot of the audience, a lot of the viewers are going to be World War One vets, are going to be people that were alive, that were children in 1909, right? So there's a contemporary element to it, even though, you know, now we look at it and be like, oh my God, that was so long ago. But you're just like, well, no, if a film's made in 1931 and the opening is 1909, yeah, that's not that early. That's not that different, right? Most of these people were alive then.
Yeah, exactly. So any other thoughts about The Public Enemy? Now, this was your first time watching it, but you didn't realize it was your first time watching it.
Yeah, so I honestly thought I gotta trade in my film history card. I really thought I had seen The Public Enemy, and I was like, oh yeah, of course, it's the one with Cagney and the grapefruit scene. Like it's a famous scene. We all know that. And I was like, okay, sure. And so I started it. And then partway through the film, I was like, I have not seen this movie. I have not seen this at all. I do not like, this is not real. And what I realized is that I had confused, at some point, I had confused the plot of Little Caesar with the plot of Public Enemy. And I hadn't like swapped out the leads or anything like that, but I had just decided that Cagney was in the Public Enemy, which is the plot of Little Caesar. And so it was an odd experience where I was like partway through the film, I was like, I have not seen this movie. This is definitely not something. I did have one more thing that I wanted to say about this. Well, Jean Harlow, who is there for like 3 scenes. I don't know why they don't use Jean Harlow more thoroughly. She gets like second billing.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it's a very strange, like, why is Jean Harlow here? And like, she's not getting to do anything. She doesn't have like any weight. She's good for what she has to do, but there's nothing there, right? The other thing I think that does have to be mentioned about this one is the violence, because again, this is a pre-code film. This is just pre-code. Also, this is a couple years before the code really comes into force. But it's still a lot of the elements that were objected to around gangster films and around social problem films like this is the level of violence. Like there's murders on screen, people bleed. The ending of the film is one of the most shocking, I guess, in some ways, endings, where Tom's body is left on his mother's doorstep, and it's left like propped up against the door so that when his brother opens the door, he falls in. It's really shocking in a lot of ways, like the level of violence that is being depicted directly on screen, and also just the cruelty of it. There's a meanness to it. That it is part of why, you know, Cagney's character is so fascinating and also so kind of repellent at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting film. And I think it's probably one of the best examples from that period of like also just the low levelness of the crime that is being depicted. Like in something like Little Caesar, which is actually about kind of the rise and fall of a Capone-like character. This is more about like Tom never becomes a big name. He never becomes a boss. He never becomes the leader of a gang. He's kind of always this secondary guy who is disposable.
Right.
And that's what's depicted finally at the end of the film, that all of these guys are disposable. They will be chewed up and spat out by people that they think are their friends, by the entire system that doesn't really care about whether or not they live or die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And the thing is that it's not that Tom is like fine with the idea of just like being offed one day, but I don't think he ever really thinks about it much. Like he doesn't kind of let himself think about it. He's very much just existing. Like he'll just do the next thing, you know, all the time. It's just what's the next job, what's the next, you know, distraction or whatever. Like he's not climbing a ladder, he's not trying to.
Yeah, it's that element of fatalism that I think is much more prevalent in something like I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, right? But it's similar in some ways in The Public Enemy, where it's not like, you know, he's probably going to die young, and he probably knows that. But he's trying to kind of get what he can while he can. It's that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
And either a rival gang is going to get him, or he's going to get caught by the cops and wind up in prison, wind up in death row.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of that's the natural conclusion to him. And so it's interesting that these films, which kind of unpack in a lot of ways some of the issues of poverty and the issues of crime, don't give solutions to it. They're sort of like, here's a problem. Mm-hmm. It's like, okay, but like, so what, does he have to choose when he's 10 years old that he's not going to be a criminal? There's absolutely no chance for him to like be anything other than that after that point, because that's just who he is.
Yeah. It's a good movie.
It's a good movie.
By the way, all three of these that we're talking about today are available on HBO Max. So if you haven't seen them, check them out there.
Yes, in nice prints too, I must say.
Yeah, they really are. HBO Max will be Max, I guess, at some point in May. I don't know why, but anyway.
For some reason.
For reasons. I'm sure they have them. What they are, I don't know. So let's talk about another big, massive gangster movie from 1942, now Voyager.
Just like from one genre to another.
A very different one. Yeah, this is not gangstery at all. This is a romance movie, and it's a coming of age movie in a lot of ways, and finding yourself, and that is now Voyager, which stars Bette Davis, Paul Heinrich, Claude Rains, and Gladys Cooper. It was directed by Irving Rapper and written by Casey Robinson from a novel from 1941 by Olive Higgins Prudy. And so this movie is Bette Davis plays a young woman who was very much not planned. She was a surprise baby, and her mother never let her forget that. And so she is very very insecure, very troubled, very quiet, and just her mother's constantly on her and always trying to fix her instead of just letting her be who she is. And then a psychiatrist comes along one day, that is introduced by, I think it's her sister-in-law, and he's like, she should come to my sanitarium. Now I hear that and I go, no, sanitariums are bad, but in this case it actually is a good thing. Because away from her mother, she blossoms.
It's also Claude Rains. So you're just like, if Claude Rains is just like, I need you to come to my sanitarium, that's when you begin asking, what genre of film am I in?
It's so true. Because my choice depends on that answer.
Exactly. Is it a women's picture with like romance elements, or is it a horror film because something will like there are many directions we can go to.
It's so true. So overall, Lauren, what are some of your thoughts about Now Voyager?
Excuse me.
As a movie.
As a movie. I think, Now Voyager, again, this is one that I've come to very, very late. I only recently saw this for the first time. It's a really fascinating film, and I think it's a fascinating film for the time period because it's very much, a quote women's picture, right? That's kind of the genre that it falls into. It's this kind of big, weepy, like kind of not unrequited romance, but like, impossible romance, right? That develops. But one of the things that I think kind of sets it apart is definitely Bette Davis and her, not her star power and her presence on screen, but the kind of different permutations that her character goes through, some of which are almost silly and almost ridiculous to us now, I think, but she gives it such weight and such honesty that I think it actually winds up elevating the film, and it makes the film into something more than it might have been. One of the bizarre things, I guess, in this film is that we're introduced to Bette Davis, and she's like a caricature of dowdiness.
Yeah.
she's got like the big glasses and the bushy eyebrows, and she is quotation marks fat. Which I'm sorry, even in her fat period, in this one, just like that is Bette Davis in a dress that's too big for her. Like, yep. That's what we're looking at right now. But one of the things I think that makes it less funny, to modern eyes at least, is again her performance, the body language, and it doesn't change. It's not like her appearance changes and suddenly she changes. She continues through a lot of the film to have this kind of this attitude of like receding from everything, of stepping away from everything, of protecting herself a great deal, kind of folding in on herself in so many ways. And it's not until fairly like late, about halfway through the film, even a little bit more than that, where she actually begins to become more confident, move with confidence, become more like the glamorous Bette Davis that we know. And I think that kind of makes the film stronger and elevates the film, and also makes it more relatable, because it really it's not really about her appearance in a lot of ways. It's about why her appearance is as it is, because she's been abused, basically. And I think that the film does a very good job at not shying away from that. The mother is abusive, and quite obvious throughout the entire film that what she's working through really is the things that have been imposed upon her, not by society even, but by her mother. And by the way that her mother has treated her, and by the abuse that she has suffered. And so for that reason, I like it. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, I think this is a movie where, I mean, I love Bette Davis. I think, her career, her filmography is just a really fascinating one. And I think that there's so many great performances there. Obviously, I mean, she was nominated for like 12 Academy Awards, something like that over her career. And, but I think what's interesting about Now Voyager, and totally your point about like they just put her in dresses that are too big and stuff like that. So it's like physically it's a little bit silly, but her performance before this character really comes into her own, before she really starts to this character Charlotte, before she really starts to have confidence and to believe in herself. Betty Davis's performance in this very quiet, very insecure, very shy, kind of scared person, she really sells it. She does such a great job, because I don't feel like she ever plays it over the top, which is something that Betty Davis is very good at doing. And I think that that's just such a good example of her star power. This is still like early in her awards run, but not like, this is not like at the beginning of her career though.
Yeah, she was a star. Like, I think that that's one of the things that this showcases, and that Warner Brothers were very good at making stars.
Yeah.
They made a lot of them. Jimmy Cagney, Humphrey Bogart, Betty Davis, Olivia de Havilland. There were a lot of people that were just like, they had this star quality and they had this star power. This is very much like Betty Davis kind of at the top of her star power. And it's interesting to see her in a role that is very different from, I think, what we expect from her in a lot of ways. Because for most of the film, she isn't glamorous. And even when she becomes glamorous, there's still that undercurrent that like something could send her back. And I think so much of the tension of the second half of the film is about like, is she just going to get stomped on again? You know, is she going to turn into the woman that she was before, despite all of the progress that she has made? Something I really like here is that there is definitely that element of like her being made over by love, right? She's deeply lonely, and she finds a man who is also lonely in his own way, in kind of a different way. And they begin this sort of tension-filled romance, right?
Yeah.
And they're attracted to each other. They like each other. There's something in the two of them that very much speak to one another. But it's so much of the film is not really about her like getting the guy or being changed by love or anything like that. It's about her gaining confidence and actually being willing and happy to live the life that she now has on her own terms, independent of her mother.
Yeah.
And independent of the things that are required of her.
And I think that's ultimately what I love about it. Because I actually really like this movie a lot. I first saw it a few years ago. I got the Criterion version sent to me, and I was like, I've never seen this. I'm gonna watch it. So I really like this movie, and I think a big part of the reason why is because of the fact that her ability to continue on and to take on or really become this woman that she is, even though that's kickstarted by this doctor and then really helped along by this man that she meets and starts to fall in love with. It's not dependent on him. It's like he helps her, but
Yeah.
she gets to a point where she's able to find her own version of happiness and feel confident in herself, because she now is like, she gets to a point where she understands that she's good and that she's not anything that her mother spent all of her life telling her that she was. And so it's like, it's a romance, and it's, you know, there's this bittersweetness to it, but her story doesn't depend on that romance, and it doesn't have to end with this beautiful, like, happy love ending.
Yeah, it upends a little bit, not completely, but it upends a little bit this whole idea of the only way that a woman's life is fulfilled, especially in the 1940s, right?
Yeah.
The only way that a woman's life is fulfilled is by getting married and having children, right? And it's interesting because over the course of the film, she has that opportunity. She meets another man. She likes him, right? She's not in love with him, but she likes him. He's a nice guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she has this opportunity of like, you could get married and have children and do all of the things that you're supposed to do. And she makes a decision. It's a great scene because she makes a decision where she's just like, this is wrong for us. This is wrong for me. And this is a bad thing for you. We don't want this.
Yeah.
And they ultimately part ways in in very amicably, right? And like I like that character as well, because he's not like, how dare you, you know. It's very much like, okay, yeah, I understand kind
Mhm.
of thing. But it does, in despite the limitations of women in the 1940s, and particularly this woman, it does give that kind of, there's another option, there's another world that she can live in, and it doesn't have to end with true love and marriage and children and all of the things. And in fact, her relationship with her mother shows that that actually can be very stultifying, and can turn very ugly and bad, because you know, you're more wrapped up in the social requirements of your position than you aren't actually whether or not you love your child and take care of your child.
Yeah.
And so I like that the film does that. It's I don't want to say that it's necessarily progressive, but it's almost accidentally progressive in some ways. It kind of gives that hint of another choice to be made.
Yeah. And I think that's ultimately why I really like it, is it doesn't tidy everything up into like this perfect package of like, this is what a woman needs in life. This is, or even men, you know, this is like the key to happiness. And it almost, for me, it almost leaves you with the sense of like, there's no such thing as a happy ending. There's just the choices that we make in life. And you know, we can just move forward, and we can find our own version of happiness, whatever that looks like for us.
It depicts a different kind of love as well,
Yeah.
because so their attraction to each other, their romance is it's emotional, it's sexual, it's romantic, it's very much there, right?
Mhm.
But both of them, by the end of the film, because of the other choices that they have made in their lives, and because of some of the choices that have been imposed on them, some of the things that have been imposed on them, they can't be together, right? And they find a way to love each other without, you know, being married, without going to bed together, all of that, without having a child together, all of those things, that is still an expression of love. And it's very much treated as a legitimate expression of love. That is still very fulfilling for both of them, and is still going to make both of them and a young girl very happy, right? And give all of them kind of the opportunity to love each other, to care about each other, but not in the totally traditional sense that a lot of films of the same period kind of ask us to accept.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on Now Voyager?
I again, this is one of those, is the women's picture films that Warner Brothers, the kind of sweeping romance that Warner Brothers sort of was known for. I mean, I believe Warner Brothers produced Gone with the Wind, I believe. They distributed it. And so you've got these, you know, big romances and these big stories of like passionate desire and all of that. And in some ways it's interesting. In some ways it would almost be a cop-out if somehow like Paul Heinrich's wife died or left him or something like that. I'd be like, oh, now we can be together. It's like, no, the tension. You have to maintain the tension.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a decade or two later, that's exactly what would have happened. They would have tried to force this, like, and they lived happily ever after type of ending. And
yeah,
that wouldn't have, I don't know. I just don't think that would have felt as satisfying in weird ways. But yeah. So, all right. So Warner Brothers continues to make movies.
For a very long time. Yes.
We're
going to jump ahead quite a few years.
Yeah. But I mean, just kind of along the way, you know, the Warner Brothers cartoons are hugely popular. You have they start winning all kinds of best pictures and stuff over the years. They, you know, World War One is gone. World War II comes in. They start making lots of World War II movies. So many World War II movies. And then they get into they start kind of branching out. So they start distributing independent films a lot. But they're still very much continuing on into producing just big movies. And in 19 oh sorry.
I just wanted to interject really quickly.
Yeah.
Warner Brothers, if anyone thinks that like, oh, Warner Brothers 100 years isn't that amazing, all that great stuff. This is the studio that Olivia de Havilland sued in the 1940s for breach of contract.
There you go.
And the studios ruled in her favor, or the court ruled in her favor, and she eventually left Warner Brothers. But this was the result was the very slow but steady destruction of the studio system. So Warner Brothers as a company was not great.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Well, and then like just look. So at the beginning, we talked about the big five, which was RKO, 20th Century Fox, Paramount, Warner, and MGM. And so it's like, look at where we're at today. Of course, 4 of those do still exist, but so like RKO got acquired eventually. 20th Century Fox now is owned by Disney. So that brand still exists, but Fox doesn't, essentially. Paramount and Warner are still going strong, and MGM has been acquired. So the fact that Paramount and Warner are still holding on, still making big movies and just still in the game, like 100 years really is an achievement. Whether that is good or bad in your eyes is up to you, but it's 100 years is a big deal. They're the only ones that have done it.
Yeah, it's remarkable, but
yeah,
it's like I think we always have to remember that the studio system is not a good thing, and unfortunately, we seem to be moving back in that direction because of some of the choices made by our current Supreme Court, and other things, and we are kind of gravitating back that way, and Warner Brothers remains and continues to be a big part of it. It's ingrained in their history, really.
Oh, it really is. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see because, I mean, they were part of the Paramount decision from the 1940s, and that was rolled back just a couple of years ago, just in the time that we have had this podcast. So in the last 5 years, that was reversed by our Supreme Court. And it's going to be interesting to see as over the next couple of years, as we really start to see the actual fallout of that, how it does impact studios. But yeah. So in 1989, Warner Brothers releases Batman, which had been a hugely successful comic. Decades before, they'd had a movie in the 60s and a TV show that I used to watch all the time when I was a kid. On reruns. I did not watch it when it was originally run because I was not alive in the 60s. But just clarifying that. But anyway, so in 1989, they released Batman with Jack Nicholson and Michael Keaton, and it's hugely successful. And this was not the first superhero like comic book movie, because we'd had some good Superman ones and some others too, but the release of Batman was a big deal, and it just kind of really opened up the genre, like reopened the genre of superhero movies, and in new, some good, some very bad ways. But Batman itself was really fun, and it spawned a sequel that is like, I don't even know where to go with this. So 1992, we have Batman Returns. We see Michael Keaton come back as Batman, and we are introduced to Danny DeVito as the Penguin and Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. It's funny because in recent years, people started saying Batman Returns is definitely a Christmas movie. I would like to remind you it was released in June.
But it's set at Christmas.
It is set at Christmas, so I can go either way. But it's like same with Die Hard. Die Hard is set at Christmas, and it came out in June. So, and so I think Gremlins too, actually, now that I think about it. But anyway, so Batman Returns does see the return of Tim Burton also directing. We have a new writer, we have new production designer, which is, I believe in this one it was Bo Welch, who did stuff like he's worked with Burton a lot. He did I think Beetlejuice and some other big stuff. But the reason I specifically mentioned Bo Welch is because one of the things about Batman Returns that I find so fascinating is how this is only 3 years later, and Gotham City, with the same director, with the same star, something happened to Gotham City in the 3 years since the Joker fell off of a church.
So it's like Gotham leaned into its own aesthetic. That's what happened.
It really did. So so I mean, I don't know how much we need to talk about the plot of this movie because I feel like everybody has seen it, but and
is the plot really the point of this
film?
No,
not at all.
When you come down to it, like, this is a film that subsists purely on aesthetic and vibes, like, honestly.
Yeah, it's so true. So I will say, here's the thing. So this came out when I was in high school, and obviously I loved the first one, had watched it a bunch, and then this one comes out. I actually, the first time I saw it, I didn't like it because it was so much darker than the first movie and a lot more violent. I love Danny DeVito, but I really did not like the Penguin. Like, he's scary, but not, to me at the time, not in a fun way. He was just deeply disturbing, and I couldn't reconcile that these two movies were a first and a second. Like, it felt, even though you have the same director and the same lead, it just felt like two completely different movies, and it just was really hard for me. So it took a long time before I came around to, Batman Returns is good, actually.
Well, Batman Returns is one step away from a horror film.
Yeah.
It's not quite a horror film, but it very much leans into the grotesqueness of the Penguin in particular. But the entire aesthetic, like, I think the Penguin and Danny DeVito's performance actually fits into the rest of the film very well. But yeah, it's much darker. It's much more sexual. It's much more like you say that even the change in Gotham's appearance, it's leaning into these sort of dark, cartoony comic book aspects of Batman, even more so than Batman, the first 1989 Batman, which Jack Nicholson is terrifying as the Joker. Scarred me for years. But there's definitely more of a lightness to both Nicholson's performance and the film as a whole. So I think in both Batman and Batman Returns, you've got villains and characters who fit into the milieu of the film and very well. But the milieu that you say is very different. And that seemed to be the attitude of Warner Brothers as well, because they turn around and bring in Joel Schumacher in 1995 to make a much still dark, but much more like, quote, family friendly Batman. And that begins the slow slide into oblivion with Batman Forever, Batman and Robin, and then kind of the reinvigoration much later of with Christopher Nolan and the Dark Knight series. So it's interesting actually how sort of the trajectory of Batman. It's like, Tim Burton went too far. Let's bring it back. Oh, no one likes that. Let's make it really dark and not fun at all. Let's just go that direction.
Yeah, it's so I think overall, so first we specifically want to talk about Batman Returns, and we'll talk about some of the fun key elements of that in a second. But I think overall, just looking at the totality of where this character has gone, all under Warner Brothers, because the big part of the reason that they keep making new Batman movies every few years is so that they can hang on to that that copyright. So yeah, like from Batman Returns, then you have the next one is what was the next one? Batman Forever.
Which used to be my favorite Batman movie, I will say.
Oh, I loved Batman Forever.
Yeah.
It's so fun. I actually thought Jim Carrey and Tommy Lee Jones were great villains. Like, it's just a fun movie. But it does have, it definitely is not the same as as that original, like that 89 Batman. And that's okay. I mean, this is when they recast. They have Val Kilmer because Michael Keaton was done. Then they have this problem because Val Kilmer at the time was not a very pleasant person to work with, which he himself will acknowledge. And I think it was Joel Schumacher who was like, yeah, I'm not working with that guy again. So they recast Batman again to George Clooney, gave him like 0 lines. I think he has 15 lines in the whole movie. And they do this Batman and Robin, which is just not good. And yet I actually kind of love it. Because it's so bad.
Uma Thurman innocent. Uma Thurman, I think, is great as Poison Ivy in that movie.
She's fantastic. Yeah.
She's having a fantastic time. And I was just like, just make a movie about her. Like, just ignore everybody else. Just make a movie about her and we'll be good. I actually kind of like Batman and Robin. I admit, like I had fun with it.
Oh yeah, like it's not a good movie, but it's just goofy and fun, and I enjoy it. And that's the thing is like I like fun Batman. So then we jump forward to 2005 with Batman Begins, which is a very different version. This is based on a separate set of comics that Christopher Nolan does. So then we have the trilogy: Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and The Dark Knight Rises. I still think they should have called the last one the Cape Crusader. But anyway, I know you and I are not on the same page on that trilogy, but I think that what it's trying to do is very different. And I think that that's good. I think that's fine. It's not trying to be those 1990s movies. It's doing something very different, which that set of comics did with the character too.
Definitely. I won't go into my issues with all of that. It is, they are of a piece. Those 3 films are of a piece. They're definitely what Nolan wants to do with the character. They're not disconnected in any sense. My problem is always that at the end of the day, I do think superheroes are silly.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're got like, and especially someone like Batman he was a ridiculously rich guy who dresses up like a bat and fights crime. Like that's silly. That's stupid. Yeah. Right. So the fun to me of any superhero movie is how much fun is the film? Like, why am I watching this? And the problem that I have with the Nolan Batmans is always that they take themselves so seriously.
Yeah.
And everyone within them takes it so seriously that I come out going like, but you're a guy dressed like a bat. Like, that's not serious. And I'm really tired of like geeks being like, no, this is very serious stuff. It's like, no, it isn't. It is cartoons for children. That's what this all started. So like, we can have fun with it, but it has to be fun. If you try to tell me, oh, it's serious, it's very important, it's like, no, it isn't. It's a dude in a bat outfit. That's my rant. I'm done. That's it.
No, I that is totally fine. Thank you for that. Because the thing is that I agree with you. Yes, it is silly, it's stupid, and I think that the fans take those movies way too seriously. And I think that's part of why The Dark Knight is so good, because even Heath Ledger's Joker, like that's the one time where you start to really have a character that's kind of calling out how silly all of this is. It doesn't go as far as, the earlier films did, but anyway, I think that, like with so many things, what ultimately ruins stuff is the fans. And some people just are just ridiculous. And so because of the Christopher Nolan Batman series that is really well made, really well performed, there's a lot of good things about it. I think people have just now leaned into, well, we demand these like really deep, meaningful things from our superhero movies instead of like, let's let it go back to just being goofy and fun again, and that's part of why sorry, now we're going off on a big old tangent, but this is part of why Birds of Prey is such a fun movie, because it doesn't take itself too freaking seriously.
Well, and to that point, and to bring it back to Batman Returns, I think one of the things that worked for me with Birds of Prey is that you get this, it's again, all of these characters are inhabiting a specific world. And it's an extreme world. It's a world that doesn't really exist. It's a comic book world.
Yeah.
Right. But they make sense within that world, and they're saying things about our world within it. And I think that that's one of the things that I really like also, especially on this rewatch of Batman Returns. All of these characters are inhabiting a very strange place. And they're very strange within that strange place. And because of that, I think that you can feel and understand kind of their motivations better. It's not serious, but it's also not like I'm going to mock this necessarily. This isn't serious, it's fun, but also within this world, these are real people, and these are their real things that they do and their real problems, right?
Yeah.
And both Birds of Prey and Batman Returns, I think, strikes that balance really well and makes it fun, but also does allow for commentary, for actual, statements about gender and sexuality and all kinds of things that run through those stories.
Yeah, that's true. And in the case of Batman Returns, what you have is someone who, in the Penguin, he is born to Pee Wee Herman, and I remember what a big deal that was when this movie came out. People were like, Batman movie. Because he was kind of.
I completely forgot about that until I rewatched this film. Just like, is that Pee Wee Herman?
Yeah, well, it was a big deal because he had really gone through it by that point. He had lost his show. He just was kind of persona non grata. He had become a joke, basically. So for him to be the Penguin's father in the new Batman movie was, I just remember people making such a big deal about it. And then, of course, he's only in the opening scene, but yeah, so it's these two parents that are very wealthy parents, and they throw their baby in a creek because he's deformed, and then he gets raised by penguins. And in the context of this movie, to your point about what you're saying, in the context of the movie, this is all serious. This is real. This is the world they live in, and that makes total sense that would happen.
Yeah, it's silly, but it makes sense. It's silly, but it's like, of course, the penguin is raised by penguins. Of course he is. Absolutely. I will accept that.
Yeah, sure. Why not? And then you have Selena Kyle, played by Michelle Pfeiffer. And that was a confusing time for me.
Every time I watch Michelle Pfeiffer, just like in that movie, you're just like, I don't know what my feelings are, but they're there.
Yep. I do love that she makes an entire bodysuit out of a jacket.
Yeah.
That's pretty fantastic. But yeah, so her boss is Christopher Walken, because why wouldn't it be? And he pushes her out a window, and then she gets bit by cats and becomes Catwoman. The origins in this are just great. I love it.
I have to say, I mean, Michelle Pfeiffer gives such a great performance in this film.
She really does.
Because she is both believable as the kind of meek, we're talking about Betty Davis earlier, as kind of the meek sort of secretary who's actually very intelligent and very capable, but really does not know how to engage in the world, right?
Yeah.
And then it's I've joked before, just like, this is a story of a simple lady who's pushed too far, right? This is the story of a simple lady who snapped, right? That is Michelle Pfeiffer in this movie. And it makes complete sense. She's traumatized. She's abused by her boss. She's like, and he doesn't just push her out a window. He intimidates and frightens her first.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
He's
so
horrible.
It is. Yeah. It's this sadism as well. And she's just like, okay, I'll become a cat and I'll just beat the shit out of men. Like, that is her reaction to
I mean, that makes sense.
It's a simple lady who snapped.
Yeah.
One too many men were mean to her. Like, it was just like, okay, I'll just kill them all.
Yeah. And look really amazing doing it. But that's the thing, is like, I think with Michelle Pfeiffer, what she does Because even after she has this transition, she still shows up in the world as Selena a lot of the time, which very much confuses her boss, who's pretty sure she died. And it's great. But she even as Selena, she starts to become more confident, more sexual, more and she ends up dating Bruce Wayne. And I love I love like later on when they both realize that like, oh, he's Batwoman, oh, she's Batman, and she's Catwoman. And she has that line about like I can't remember if she says something like,
"Oh no, do we have to start fighting?"
Yeah.
Yeah. She's so like, "Oh God, oh no, do we have to fight?"
Like I finally found a man who doesn't treat me like shit, but now we have to be mortal enemies. Dang it. So I just, yeah.
Well, I really actually love the interactions between Batman and Catwoman and Bruce Wayne and Selena Kyle, because they do like they make sense together, and they make sense both in terms of the persona, they're like crime fighting, crime villainy personas, and in like the way that they relate to each other outside of it. These are people that understand each other at some level. These are deeply traumatized people who have gone through it, and really don't know who they are. And I think that that's something that I really like about. There's something psychologically realistic, amazingly enough, in particularly in their relationship and the way that they talk about the problems that they're suffering. Because Selena's like traumatized, and she's had a psychotic split basically,
Right.
and she doesn't know what to do. She's bothered by it. But she's definitely compelled, and she's being pushed forward into something else. Bruce has had to deal with it for, you know, his entire life, and he's made certain choices about it, but he has that same experience of like, you know, a little bit, and this speaks to Michael Keaton's performance as well. Push him a little bit farther and he's a villain. Push him a bit farther and he's a psychopath. And it's this balancing act that both of them are having to do, that they understand in each other. And I like the fact that while the film is not like we're now going to investigate the deep dark recesses of their minds, it still has that, and it shows the two of them trying to relate to each other and understand each other in the midst of this really horrific trauma that both of them are going through.
Yeah, it's true. I also just like how this movie manages to pack in a lot of different types of story and different themes. So obviously it's a superhero like villain movie, and you've got that like seedy underbelly of Gotham and the crime, the gangs and all that, but you also have this like political stuff happening too, because then you've got this billionaire Shrek, which is hilarious because this is way before the movie Shrek, and but now all I can do is think of a big green ogre. But anyway, so he's trying to, so they like make the Penguin look like this big hero, and then they want him to be the mayor, even though there currently is a mayor and there's not an election for a while. In fact, I think they just had one. And but anyway, so they're trying to do this like political maneuvering too, because then if Shrek can install his guy as the mayor, then that'll give him a lot more opportunities to do his evil stuff too. And then you have Catwoman going into a partnership with Penguin because she's trying to accomplish certain things. And I think that's part of what makes this such a fascinating movie, is because in the midst of all this silliness, you also have these themes that are like, oh no, I can definitely see, but there's just this like kind of the more mature grown-up themes to it too. Like with the first movie, it became just Batman versus Joker, and you just have to stop the bad guy. But this is like, you have to stop really bad people from completely overrunning and literally taking over every element of your city.
Yeah, and I think that I like Christopher Walken kind of gets forgotten in some ways in the midst of the weirdness that is the Penguin and the
like when Christopher Walken's not the weirdest part of your movie.
Exactly,
fascinating.
Yeah. And he's great. I think that he does a great job. But yeah, he's honestly like watching it just like, is this based on Donald Trump? Because it feels like it is, in a certain sense, of like this kind of figure who has taken over sections of Gotham, basically. It's basically bought sections of Gotham. I just want to say, I think that Max Schreck is a reference to the German actor Max Schreck,
Probably.
who plays the vampire in Count Orlok in Nosferatu. That's like the first time I was just like, is this an actual character in a comic book, or is this something that Tim Burton made up? Because if it's something Tim Burton made up, then this definitely comes from like Nosferatu.
Yeah. But I still just think of Big Green Ogre now, because
this adds another layer of weirdness.
I know.
Yeah, and there is that sense of like, he's manipulating the Penguin, but the Penguin is also off on his own little tangents of like, and one of the things that I really like about this is that the villains are not dedicated to one plot. Like Max Schreck definitely is, right? And he's sort of like, okay, I got to kind of arrange all of this. The Penguin is just like, well, it didn't work when I ran for mayor, right? So I'll just steal all of the firstborns. I'll just do that. It's like, well, that didn't work. Well, I'll just kill everybody then. It is this like he just keeps on moving from one plot to another. He doesn't really care. He just wants to cause havoc. Yeah. And take revenge on Gotham and on the world that has rejected him, right? That's the undercurrent of everything. It's the same thing with Selina. Selina doesn't have a clear purpose. She wants to get Shrek. But that's really about it. She's not like, I have plans to take over the world or anything like that. And so she uses the Penguin to kind of further those ends, or she even uses Batman or Bruce Wayne. She's just looking for like, I need to find a way to get Shrek. That's what I'm up to. Also, I want to blow up department stores and, cause havoc. And I do like that. Someone mentioned actually recently that in a certain sense, both Batman and Batman Returns are very low stakes in terms of the world. There's no apocalyptic plot.
Right.
There's like, we're going to take over the world. We're going to destroy the world. We're going to, kill everybody or anything like that. It's very much centered on Gotham. And so the stakes are high for the characters themselves, but they're very low for the viewer in a lot of ways. And I think that means we can have a lot more fun with the villains. We can enjoy the Penguin a lot more. We can enjoy Selina a lot more because it doesn't feel like they're, if their plots fail, well, they'll be back next week kind of thing.
Right. Yep, exactly. What a fun movie.
It is a fun movie. And I will say Danny DeVito is terrifying and very much frightened me when I was a child. I did not see this movie when it came out, but I saw it when I was a bit older. So I would have been about 6, I think, when this movie was released. But I saw it when I was a bit older, and like I am haunted forever and always by Danny DeVito as the Penguin. And he's just so gross.
Yeah.
And grotesque. And then it just gets weirder and weirder as the film goes on. And then by the end, where the penguins carry him off into the water of the sewers, and it's like I am so troubled by this.
The fact that there's penguins living underneath Gotham City is another fun, like, what? What are we doing here?
Who are then like equipped with rocket launchers at some point. And yeah, there's so many things in this film that don't make any sense when you really take a step back. And I swear this would piss off fanboys. If this exact film like was released this like now, it would make fanboys so mad. They'd be just like, we're mocking Batman or something like that. Yeah. But in 1992, it's fantastic. It's so much fun.
It was great. But just back to Danny DeVito being really scary as the Penguin. Oh my gosh. I was very haunted by the fact that he bit a guy's nose off. That was just like, oh, that was horrifying to me. But yeah, now I can watch it and go, man, this movie is so dark and like in such a good way. And I love it.
there's also I don't know why, but him eating the raw fish
Yeah, just
bothers me
snacking on it.
so much.
So
Just
gross.
like, yeah, and it's like there's just something really disgusting about that, and I can't look away, and it's so gross. And he carries the fish around for
Yeah.
most of that scene too. He's just like, and he's gnawing on it, like, I don't want to see this.
He's gnawing on it like a little kid eating an ice cream cone. Like it's just
Yeah.
it's so weird. Yeah. But then you have that in opposition to or set against Michelle Pfeiffer as Catwoman. And one of the things that I love about just some of the little details of Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman, like I mentioned, she makes an entire bodysuit out of a jacket. But I love that she's this woman who she's not rich. She's living in this little apartment, she's working as a secretary. And so even when she becomes the Catwoman, she's not living large, she's still her. She's still living within her own means. And so it's like you see these details throughout the movie of like where her suit will get torn and then she's like adds a new little stitches to it, or she just walks around with like something like seams coming apart and stuff. And it's just these little fun details of like it's something that you probably don't really pay that much attention to unless you've seen the movie multiple times, and you start looking at it. But it's like it just kind of fits in with that character, and I love that that you see these details with both of them that just really fit into who they are in this very Tim Burton creation.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Well, any final thoughts about Warner Brothers before we close?
They like you said, all of these films are right now available on HBO Max, and if you haven't seen them, definitely see them. If you have seen them, watch them again, because particularly like rewatching Batman Returns, it has been ages since I saw Batman Returns, and I was like, I'd forgotten how weird this was, but also how great it is. It's Warner Brothers, for good and ill, has had a major impact on Hollywood. Obviously, as you said, it's one of the few studios from the studio era that still exists.
Yeah.
And that actually has this ongoing history, and it's interesting to see those, and also just to see kind of where it came from, where it's going. God only knows what's going to happen to it next. But it has had this major impact on Hollywood culture and a major impact on American culture.
Yep, it's true. And yeah, a lot of great historical films are available on HBO Max. They're also on Criterion. And because it is their 100th, and we're not being sponsored for this episode, I'm just going to say, but because it is the 100th anniversary, if you're into physical media, you can get so many Warner Brothers titles from their entire history. You can find them on 4K, you can find them on Blu-ray, really discounted. Also some not so discounted. Awesome like box sets. So so many of their movies are available to stream or to purchase out there in the world. And as much as there are problems with the company, they have produced some really fantastic films over the years. Some of them are some of my favorite movies. So, you take the good with the bad, I guess.
Well, it's always that's always the thing with the film industry when you really come down to it. We could talk about any major film studio in exactly the same way. It's just like, let's talk about Disney sometime,
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate that you've been here, and we especially appreciate those who help keep things going. We'd like to thank our patrons: Ollie, Brian, Connor, Estefania, Heather, James, Judy, Karen, Carriata, Matt, Michelle, Monty, Nanina, Robert, Steve, Sharon, and Tao. If you'd like to become a patron yourself and help keep the show on, help pay for our hosting and all that fun stuff, you can go to patreon.com/citizendame and subscribe. And with your help, what you get in return is you get bonus episodes. We have a beef bonus episode, some other things. We've got some more stuff coming your way. You get early access to episodes. We have buttons and all kinds of things. If you have signed up and you haven't gotten your stuff yet, let us know. I know we had a new patron or two that might not have gotten things, but I think everyone's gotten what we're supposed to send them. So we'll but let us know if you haven't. So yeah. You can also support us at our Zazzle store, zazzle.com/citizendamepod, and Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/citizendame. We also do have a donate button on our website, citizendamepod.com. So you can just, toss in a couple dollars here or there if you want. There's absolutely no obligation to do so. We do this for the love of talking about movies. And anything that you do does go straight into supporting the show. So yeah. We are available lots of different ways too if you want to reach out to us and send us your thoughts. And first of all, you can get us on email. Email is citizendamepod@gmail.com. And then we're on the socials. We're still on Twitter. It's still going. And Instagram at citizendamepod. We do have a Mastodon account. We're still holding it. I feel like that kind of ran its course, though. I don't hear people talking about it so much. Now they're talking about other things.
Yeah, now they're talking about Blue Sky, which I'm not doing yet. I'm waiting.
So Blue Sky is hilarious because essentially that is Jack Dorsey's new site, which is the guy that just sold Twitter to Elon Musk. So now it looks like possibly the guy that created Twitter 2.0 and made it better than Twitter after he sold Twitter. Maybe. We'll see.
So someone mentioned that the new Twitter is going to be a website that isn't trying to be the new Twitter, and I think that that's a very legitimate statement. So many social medias like Twitter, including Twitter, become big simply because of reasons. It's just people gravitate towards them. And so trying to be the new Twitter is almost a guarantee that you're not going to be the new Twitter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, but when something does replace Twitter, we will be there and we will tell you all about it. But I think probably one of the most fun ways to find us is on Letterboxd, where we are at Citizen Dame. And we do keep lists. Every month we have a new running list of all the films that we've talked about on the podcast that month. Like this month, this is just such a funny, granted we were off the first 2 weeks. So this is a shorter list than we normally have for an entire month, but just this collection of movies, doesn't this just make you want to listen to our episodes? We have Creed 3, Beef, Mafia Mama, Renfield, Body Heat, The Last Seduction, Jade, Fatal Attraction, Basic Instinct, Bound, The Public Enemy, now Voyager, and Batman Returns. What a weird grouping of movies, and it's been so much fun.
It is, yeah. It is a weird group. We have varied tastes, I think, on this podcast.
Multitudes. So anyway, but yeah, you find us on Letterboxd and you can find our lists. We have other lists too. We also link stuff from our website, and yeah, so we're actually working on building up our Letterboxd more. So definitely follow us along there for fun stuff. And you can find us individually too. Lauren, where are you?
I am on all of the various socials at LH Business.
And I am also on all the socials at Karen M. Peterson. So that is it for this week. We thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
Who is she? What is she? I don't know whether to open fire or fall in love.
You poor guys. Always confusing your pistols with your prides.
Don't hurt us, lady. Our take home's less than $300.
You're overpaid. Hit the road.